Okay,
Something we need to know.
so we're learning Baal Shem Tov and the Torah.
Ask her, he belongs to her.
Oh, okay.
We're learning Baal Shem Tov and the Torah, and so every week we took one piece out of it. And like we explained a few times, that these sections, these are quotes really from books from the students of the Baal Shem Tov, because we don't have anything really from him himself. So this is from the Meorei Naim. Meorei Naim is Rav Nachum of Chernobyl, and he was actually by the Baal Shem Tov. So it might very well be that he's mamish quoting from what he heard. And it might be that he heard it from one of the other students, but it might be that he's quoting something that he heard himself. So in the Parsha has, and this is what a lot of people focus on, is that the Torah spends time telling us that Yitzchak would dig wells. And wells to get water, and that was his main service of Hashem. When you talk about Abraham and you say that he, right, maybe the first time we meet him in really his own parsha, that he's all by himself, he goes to Eretz Yisrael, and then he is famous for saving Lot, his nephew, and then he's famous for his hospitality, and he's famous for being involved in the universal needs of the people around him. And then suddenly there's this shift with last week's Parsha Chayesara, that we suddenly focus on something, on one small specific event that doesn't even involve Yitzchak directly. Okay. Why do I say that Chayesara is a shift? Because it's accepted that there are two Parshas for each of the patriarchs. So Avram is Lech Lecha and Vayera, and Yitzchak is Chayesara and Toldos, and Yaakov, he has also two, Vayetze, Vayishlach, and then from Vayeshev and on, it becomes a story of Yosef and his brothers. Really, they have four parshas in the end. So there's two universal parshas, Bereshis Noach, two for Avram, two for Yitzchak, and two for Yaakov, and then four for the tribes. So Chayesara is already about Yitzchak. Yitzchak's hardly mentioned in it. It's a long, long story, a tale about how Eliezer goes to find him a shidduch. But Yitzchak doesn't really appear in the shidduch. So it's like, when you get to Yitzchak, suddenly you move from these universal concepts to something very specific. Very specific. So specific that it's like even a footnote in his own life. Like he wasn't even involved in the Chayesara. When you come to our parsha, to Toldos, so it is about Yitzchak himself, and it's about this important story, but we don't see the same universal involvement or the same universal principles that guided Abraham being played out in Yitzchak's story. And instead, Yitzchak seems to be much more focused on himself. So it started with Chayesara, where it's mamish focused on something next to him, the whole story of this shidduch, which didn't involve him directly. And in Toldos, we learn about what he used to do. So what was his job? What was his avodas Hashem? What was his way of serving Hashem? To dig wells. That's how it's accepted. That was his service of Hashem. To dig a well. What kind of service is that? So that immediately awakens everybody to ask the question, what do you learn from this? How can you generalize this? Make it into a theme that fits every person. Because it should. So you can, with the names and other things, but we look for something that can generalize the whole concept of digging a well. So let's see how the Baal Shem Tov tackled this question. Again, this is a question that faces everybody. At the end of the parsha, it's easier. Why is it easier? Because we've talked about this in the past. The conflict between Esav and Yaakov comes to the forefront. And when it comes to the forefront, it highlights the fact that within the Jewish people, the conflict is usually between the people in the same generation and not between generations. Whereas by the non-Jews, the conflict is usually between the generations. It's like a common theme that you can see almost in everywhere. And it, by the way, is one of the differences between Jewish psychology and non-Jewish psychology. That the Jewish call it the zeitgeist or the cultural environment that we live in. It creates a certain it channels the problems in our lives more to the connection with our siblings or with people that are with us on the same generational rung, and not so much with the ones before us or after us. That's not where the issues really lie. They will spill over into our relationship with our parents or with our children, but the main issue is dafka between the people in the same generation, the siblings. Okay. And this goes on, of course, with the tribes. It becomes a really important topic between Yosef and his brothers. But so that's more easy to generalize. But the thing with the wells is kind of difficult. So let's see what the Baal Shem Tov said about this. So in this piece, really, it's cut off in Baal Shem Tov on the Torah in this book. He started from Vayetze, it's about Vayetze, and it's trying to explain something that Yaakov did. And then he generalizes and he says, in general, this is how you need to understand what the patriarchs did. And this is what he says. This is the mystery of all the wells that the forefathers dug, should be patriarchs, in order to find water, meaning Torah in the earth that is on the lowest level. He says, right off, that the concept of digging a well in the earth to find water means trying to uncover Torah underground. Okay. The water is Torah, and the earth that's covering it, we'll have to see what that is. But it caused, for some reason, the Torah comes from a lower level, from a deep place. It might remind us of a pasuk in Tehillim, Emet me'eretz titzmach. The truth grows out of the earth. And it comes from above. Now, this is very interesting because usually when we think about Torah, what do we say? The Torah comes from a high place to a low place. Okay? Because Hashem gave the Torah. Vayered Hashem al Sinai. Hashem came down to give the Torah. To say that there's Torah that comes from below is something of a new concept. It's something of a new idea. As the Baal Shem Tov said regarding the verse, all the wells that his father's servants had dug while his father Abraham was alive, the Philistines had sealed them and filled them with earth. Meaning that Abraham dug these wells, and then the Philistines, they covered them. They sealed them with earth. We're going to have to understand the symbolism behind that. What does that mean about this special Torah that comes from underground? What does it mean that it's covered and sealed with earth? For each of the patriarchs brought about the revelation of Torah from the element of earth and from the lowest levels. How did they do it? Again, you have to remember, they did not receive Torah from above. So they had to bring the Torah from below.
The kidneys.
So like it says about Avram, that his kidneys, which are the lowest part of the body, the part of the digestive system. So they taught him the eitzas, the advice about what to do, how to conduct his life, which turned out to be exactly what later Hashem commanded us to do. So he learned it from a different source. And again, like we've said in previous classes, it's not that he put tefillin on like we put tefillin on, it's not that he did what we do, but he had the same concepts. And how he manifested them was different, but they represented the same things that our mitzvahs represent. So they brought it out from the lowest levels by perfecting each one's particular character trait and finding water there, a well of living water, so that their earth's concealing nature not conceal the water. So this is a big foundation in the Baal Shem Tov, that before the Torah was given, there is Torah that comes out of reality. But he adds here something very important, that the way that it comes out of reality is not without toil. It's not just observing reality and learning something. No, it's about perfecting your character trait. that whatever nature you were born with, your innate nature, when you perfect it, when you rectify it, when you use it to serve Hashem, you'll learn from reality the Torah that you need to learn. Meaning, it's a very psychological process. That's how we see it. That the patriarchs went through a process of discovery through the toil of the self. Not from the self, but by toiling on the self. There's a lot of people who say, if I just look deep enough inside me, I'll find my truth. This is not that simple. You have to look inside yourself to see what you need to rectify. And when you do that, when you toil on that, when you work on that, then reality will reveal to you what you need to see. But it's not that it comes from looking inside just per se. The only reason to look inside is to ask, what does Hashem want from me? And I have an inner nature that I was born with. And Hashem wants me to fix that nature. Wants me to use it the right way. So that toil is call it the combustible energy which powers the process of discovery. It's not that the discovery is necessarily inside me. It's not that the truth is waiting to be found inside me. But rather through my toil it's discovered in reality. So that's what he says, so that the earth's concealing nature not conceal the water. Why does the earth conceal the water? Why is there... What's the order of things? What's the order of the four elements?
The domain and the vegetation.
That's not elements. Those are...
fire, water, air.
From above, it's fire, air, water, earth. So what is
the miracle that the earth is over the water?
Kin. So what is it? What is that? Who did that? Hashem did that on the second day. What did he say? Really, the waters should have covered the earth. And then Hashem said the waters should go into lakes, into rivers, into their places, and the earth will be seen. And from that moment on, there's earth that covers water. So what is that? Is that good or bad?
That's why you have to dig. That's why you have to discover how good to...
Yeah, so in general, the idea is that in the future it says that the truth will cover, or consciousness of God will cover the earth like water, covers the seas. So the image there is that everything becomes revealed. And because the water represents Torah. So Torah is concealed now. If the earth is over the Torah, it means that somehow the Torah has been concealed in reality. So the same process that I go through in myself of rectifying my own nature, which conceals my true nature. It's like to say that the way that I'm born, my innate nature is only a concealment of what I really am. It doesn't really reveal it to me.
Tension first and the second nature?
Okay, it's the same idea. It says when the earth was first created, what was it? Tohu vavohu. That the earth is like a tohu vavohu. It's a chaotic covering that covers my true nature. I can't really see my true nature. And I only begin to reveal it through toil, through working in the world. And working in the world in the sense of Abraham was to be hospitable, to be a Baal Chesed, to perform acts of kindness to people. What about Yitzchak? So Yitzchak, his toil was to make wells, to dig wells. That still needs to be understood. But what he's saying here is that Yitzchak came to do something which was to guide us in how to uncover the water that's concealed underneath the earth. That's like his work.
That is Gvura?
Yeah, that's Gvura. That's what it says, that in the future we'll paskin like Beis Shammai. The house of Shammai, the academy of Shammai, they're gevura, the more harsh judgment. But it's not necessarily that it's harsh. It's not necessarily that it's judgment in a negative sense, but rather that it's a certain way of looking at things. So in the future, he becomes our father. He's more guiding. In any case, the way that it turns out here is because Yitzchak is like teaching us a psychological process, as we'll see in a few minutes. Okay, so that was the first part. Now he says, however, after Abraham died, these revelations were sealed up by the earth. So he says, first of all, you have to know that Abraham also dug wells. What were Abraham's wells? What did they represent?
You said it was too fast. Flash.
In general, everything that the patriarchs did was too fast.
Right.
Too fast for us. It's okay for them, I guess. But for us to do the same thing, it doesn't work. So now he says, Abraham, he also dug wells. What did Abraham do by digging his wells? Because his service of Hashem was hospitality. So what were the wells for? Okay. So, but why did he do? What does it mean that he dug wells? So the understanding here is that he found well springs of Torah in reality. That's what he did. Meaning he perfected the system by which, when you work on yourself, when you rectify how you are, then the world reveals to you all kinds of secrets about Hashem. So he did this. He was successful in this, meaning that the story of his life, what he did in his life, became Torah. How many of us, the story of our lives becomes Torah? Anybody here willing to volunteer?
Well, I'll quote you. I mean, the words you said this. Can I quote you?
Yeah, you don't need to quote me. It's not my quote. It's David of Lalo. So today we want to say that you don't have to wait till you pass away. You can start doing it now. So why wait? It's just so good. So let's see how you do it. So there's a process involved. So hopefully we'll reveal this. There's a few things that connected to this. So Avram already learned from his life, from what he had done, meaning he was just Abraham. And Abraham was a person full of loving kindness. So he acted that way. Of course, he fixed it. What does it mean he rectified it? That he said, even the loving kindness that I do, I will go against my own innate nature and tell you that if you don't bench, if you don't bless Hashem after you eat, you have to pay for it. And that was against his nature. To do that, to go against his nature, that was a rectification. So on the one hand, he's very hospitable. He's the most open person in the world, the most loving person there is. And yet, he suddenly has an agenda. And to take that agenda upon himself was the rectification of his innate nature. It was against his innate nature. Because when you think about it, to tell somebody, look, that something that you really want to feed, and at the end you tell them, you already fed them. And now you say, if you don't bless God for it, if you attribute the good to me, then you have to pay for it.
What's wrong with that?
Because I'm not just doing it because of my innate nature. It's the main thing that we learned in Perek Avodat Hashem, right? In rectifying the ego. That even if the ego has natural good in it, the natural good is still not divine good. As much as the nature of the world is to be good, but it's not divine good because it doesn't have consciousness of Hashem. So when he forced somebody to bless, that was adding not just divine consciousness to the person, but to himself. Saying that the reason that I do good is because it's to bring people closer to Hashem. And that was tough for him. Okay? Let's say there's a person who's by nature is judgmental. He's the opposite of Abraham. Everything has to be, he's not judgmental to others, he's judgmental to himself. So how does he fix that? He says, even The fact that I'm judgmental shouldn't be because naturally I'm this way and because of that I'm organized and I daven on time and everything and all these things. Everything is in its place, everything is thought through, everything is, perfect. I do it because Hashem told me. And that's really hard, because if you're very orderly, it's against the natural order of things. To say that I'm only doing it because Hashem told me. No, because it's my nature. So that's to take away from the natural order of things, from my natural inclination, and to turn it into something divine. This is a topic we've discussed many times.
But if a person does kiruv today, there's an idea behind it.
Right? But there are people who enjoy, they love being with new people. They love showing people the beauty of Yiddishkeit and so on. So even that, it could be this, your natural nature. Still work under somebody. So there becomes that this is a mission that you have. Somebody gave you the skill. Not just because you enjoy it, just because you are connected. Because again, so there's lots of stuff. We've talked about that enough times. So here, Abraham, he learned how to do this. He uncovered Torah, and remember last week we discussed this, or 2 weeks ago, that when a guest would come in, he would learn Torah from the guest.
Right.
That he received the light of Torah from the guest through the actions that he was doing. So that's like digging a well to uncover the wellspring. Digging the well is always true, because digging the well is like a metaphor for digging into your own character. It's like doing the difficult work of digging up, as we'll see in a moment, what exactly this earth is that's covering, concealing the divine nature of the world. To dig away the earth is to remove all the klipot. We'll see. The earth here represents the klipot, the shells, the impure shells. Here it could be like what we just said, that the basic impure shell in everybody is my ego, is that I do things because I have self-interest. So to remove that, to dig it away, means to dig a well inside me. And when I'm able to dig a well, so then water comes out, and that water is new Torah. And then my actions become a vehicle for discovering new Torah, for bringing Hashem into the world. Okay. So after Abraham died, these revelations were sealed up by the earth that returned to cover the water. But it didn't stop return. It wasn't just that the wells, the earth fell in because they weren't used. It says no, the recovering was due to the Philistines. They're the impure klipot shells that reasserted themselves. Okay? But Isaac came and redug the wells. As it is written, he redug the wells that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. This too refers to the revelation of Torah through Abraham and Isaac's deeds, where even today the Torah lies hidden, meaning Maseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that the actions of the patriarchs are a sign for us. They're like a sign where to dig. They're like X marks the spot. The pirates have been here. This is the place to dig. So where they dug, what they worked on, there are 3 traits, which are loving kindness, Gomlei Chasadim, that's called in Hebrew, and they're Baishanim, that they keep to themselves, meaning they don't show off with their success, with their love of Hashem, they don't make a big deal out of it. They're Baishanim.
So what's the second one?
Baishanim.
So the second is the third one?
No, the first one is loving kindness.
Okay.
Gomlei Chesed.
Oh, okay.
And then there's Baishanim.
Hashem is Gvura.
Yeah, that's Yitzchak. Yitzchak's a very to himself person. He's not a public figure. Interesting.
More sneers.
Okay, להיות ביישן, כן, בסדר. It's not left in Hashem Lekecha. To walk with sneers.
Something else besides, there's another connotation besides sneers?
Busha is like to be embarrassed. That's how it's usually translated. But a Baishanim is a person who keeps to himself. He doesn't flaunt what he has. What he's
Introvert?
so one way of saying it is an introvert, but an introvert is more. An introvert is like how comfortable you are with other people. You don't have to be necessarily. I mean, you can be an extrovert and be a baishan, and not flaunt who you are, but rather take interest in somebody else all the time. So I'm not sure that extrovert is the best.
To be adin.
To be idle is to be a
Or
baishan.
doesn't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, sure, no, because there's distance. There is distance. Meaning, I don't show you my trophy case. I don't let you into my trophy room, where I keep all my trophies between me and Hashem. That's like a baishan. And the last one is Rahmanim, that they're compassionate. And that's Yaakov's. You have to be really compassionate to have 12 kids like he did. And obviously you have to be full of compassion. So there, they mark the spots where you need to dig. So dig for these. Dig for loving kindness, dig for being modest, and dig for being compassionate. And so they mark the spots for us. For all that they rectified and did was in the manner of the particular events that the Torah documents. So you have to look at what they did. The Torah tells you these stories. It tells us these stories because these stories are what character traits they worked on, they toiled on, and transformed into vehicles that carry godliness, and they're what we need to work on. And yet, it wasn't, even though these were, why are they called patriarchs? Because even though these are the personal stories of people, these were actual people that lived with an actual life-sized people, with the regular needs of people. But nonetheless, they're called patriarchs because their story, their personal story, is relevant for the rectification of future generations. For were it not for the patriarchs, it would be impossible to fathom in any way and to draw close to God at all, meaning you couldn't have any conception of Hashem. And again, what do you mean you wouldn't have any conception? You would have a conception from what the Torah was revealed from above. But from your own life, from your own actions, that would not be a vehicle for you. Because they opened the way for this to happen. For a person's, it's like like you're saying, the message, the moral of Genesis, of Bereshit, is that personal life matters. The private individual life, even though En Zichron Rishonim, nobody remembers who lived in the past. Nobody knows who lived in the past. Nobody cares. And nonetheless, the Torah focuses on these three individuals, telling us that you should know that that's not entirely true. That they are the fathers of the world. Why they're the fathers of the world? Because they took their individual work seriously. And it wasn't just for them because of that. Because of that, it affected all the future generations. Okay, so all this is well known. I don't think that's anything so surprising. What I think is surprising is how does this relate to us? They were like this, so they gave me a map where to dig. You should dig in these three areas in which they dug. It's a little bit of a chiddush to say that they're all digging wells in a certain sense. They're all uncovering the earth, meaning uncovering their first nature and trying to come to a higher nature. It's a little bit of a chiddush. But how does that relate to us? What is it saying about us? So the first thing that comes to mind is, who are these Philistines? That's like the question. What do you mean? If Avram worked so well, pun not intended, he worked so well on himself, how could Philistines, and what does it mean that they suddenly covered it with earth again? No. I'm going to say in the end, I'm going to come back to converts, but in the opposite direction. But, who could these be? So he says these are shells. The Philistines are a particular type of klipa, a particular type of negative energy. It's called that they're the klipa of leitzanut, of mockery. It's very interesting that there's a carrying of opposites in this description, that the Philistines covered the wells. Why? Because what does a Philistine mean in Hebrew? Mefulash. Mefulash, Plishti is a mefulash, is something that's open from end to end. So the fact that something that's open from end to end is the one that covered it is like you need to think about this image. Yeah, like a street that is open on both ends is called a mavoi mefulash. That's a whole Shabbos in the Gemara in Shabbos. Mefulash is something that's open from end to end. It's not a dead end. And on the contrary, you would think that what they're doing here is they're turning it into a dead end.
Making the wells, just turning it into.
Yeah, it's like covering them is like.
Filling what they don't have, like a straw. They're empty.
Yeah.
They're filling a well, which is making it whole.
Okay, maybe they're the conduit.
But would they have been allowed to use that water, or that belonged to Yitzchak, Abraham and Yitzchak?
So he contested it with them all the time. They have a lot of arguments over these wells. It's not clear if these are the same wells exactly that Avram dug, or whether he dug new ones, mamish new ones. And then in the end he digs another 3 wells.
No, would they have been allowed? Is that for everybody those wells? Or it was
Apparently,
private
with Avram you would imagine that it was private.
in Yitzchak?
Were they private?
So they are
They didn't come together. Maybe they were eroding those 3 values that.
Yeah, so how do you erode those values?
How do you erode it?
Well, I don't think it's specific to this value of Zeva. How do you erode a well? What does it mean to cover it? If the well was, again, what was the process of digging the well? To say that there is meaning in what I need to go through. So what would be the mockery, the erosion of that process? But there's no meaning. There's no meaning. It's open-ended. Meaning, how do you mock something? One of the best ways to mock, one of the best examples I know of mockery in Torah, is that there's an area of Torah called Gematria. And eventually somebody figures out that, what do you mean? Everything is equal to everything. You just shift around the letters enough, and whatever you want. Or as a very bright young man told me, Torah is big enough, you can find anything you want. You find any phenomena you want in mathematics.
Is that wrong?
It's a mockery. Why is it a mockery? Because you're open-ending everything. You're just saying it doesn't really matter.
And also
It's all the same. Whether you're here or whether you're there, it's all the same. Really, there is hierarchy in findings and phenomena. Meaning, let's say you found that something is equal to something. Not all equations have the same value. Okay? It's strange because when you think about things numerically, you say, yeah, but 10 is always equal to 10. You can't tell me that there's one 10 that's more equal to another 10. Or when you tell me that, maybe the most famous one, that Elohim equals nature, and they're both equal to 86, so there's a million things that are equal to 86. How can you tell me that these two are more important than everything else? They're more equal to each other. So mathematics has this, or numbers, quantity has this thing that we tend to think that it's completely meaningless. And it's dimensionless. It doesn't really say anything. So therefore, any 86 is equal to any 86. And when somebody says, no, there's a hierarchy of meaning even in this. So he's saying you can't make a mockery of it. You make a mockery of it by just saying it could be anything you want. It doesn't matter.
That's a Malay.
So it says specifically that this is Plishtim. That's what they do. That's their speciality. In a certain sense, it's been talked about a lot, but the Arabs that live in Eretz Yisrael today, now they want to be a continuation of the Philistines. Every time they find something new. So I've said, okay, at least in terms of in terms of the methods that they use, they're using exactly the same thing, making a mockery of everything that's sacred.
But how does covering it makes it, that's not consistent with keeping it open-ended? Covering
Again,
it.
it's not consistent. What we're trying to say is that by mocking something, the way to mock is to say it's just like everything else. There's no
Right.
meaning to it.
Then what is the meaning of
So
covering
the
it?
meaning of your digging the well, you lose it. You went through a process that was very meaningful to you. And because somebody belittles it by saying, well, this is like everything else. You're not special. What you went through, everybody goes through. It's not special. There's nothing new in your story. There's nothing special about you. That's what it means. The things that are open-ended means
I
really.
understand that, but what's
Okay.
it got to do with covering the well?
So again, the well was that Avram looked into himself and he said, my nature is to be hospitable, to do acts of loving kindness. And through the rectification of that specific task that I have, I come to find the Torah that I need. Okay. Then comes the Philistine and says, we also had an Avram. He said exactly the opposite. You know, he did the same thing. We had an Avram, wasn't in Beersheba, it was somewhere in Ashkelon. And he used to do the same stuff. And I'm telling you, your father's not anything special. And we had the same thing. And that's it. So you lose the whole process that you went through. It loses its meaning.
No individual.
There's no meaning to the individual process that he went through.
So then it's in a simple place, kind of fight with faith, whatever it is, like, if it's in the desert, water is good for anybody, and if it was open for everybody's use, who would close it? If it was so needed.
Right, why would they close it?
There's water everywhere.
Well, they're always
So
doing
they
that,
almost
they're always
harm
cutting
themselves.
off.
just
Yeah, they don't want.
Dafka.
We see that so
Right,
clearly
yeah.
today.
Of course, yeah, they do
It's to harm themselves. But again, it's just to show you that you're nothing special. There's nothing about you. And everything that you have, we have. You have the Holocaust, we have a Holocaust. We have this, we have this. You tell us that you have a Temple Mount? Our prophet put his horse there. It's all mockery. It's so stupid when you hear it.
Nothing is
It's just, again, there is nothing sacred really. It's a mockery of everything that's sacred. It's a mockery of all hierarchy in the world. And why does it fit the leftist agenda? Because in a certain sense, that's what the leftist agenda is, that there's no hierarchy in the world. That even if there is hierarchy, you have to battle it and throw it out the window.
Everything is valid in a country like any
Yeah,
other country.
exactly.
Don't need to throw
Exactly. So, in any case, I was just mentioning that in parentheses.
The idea of the individual, such as like the latest opportunity of briefing and saying they're breaking down the whole agenda to break down the individual, especially
And the individual then loses also meaning. In the end,
well, they started seeing
that's the thing that they miss. That in the end, they're pushing towards the individual becoming transparent. And in fact, there's a whole understanding today in the academic world. At least some people are coming to this understanding that the left is just as fascist as the right, and sometimes even more. Meaning that the fascism is not based on taking the individual and making him subservient to the state. Rather, it's that the state makes the individual transparent and meaningless.
What do you mean by transparent?
Like, think about people in communist in the Soviet Union. The individual is no longer anything as an individual. It's only something that we provide for, but we provide the same to everybody. There's no differences between people. And it strips the person of his individuality in a different way. And they both can become fascist. There's no difference. You can be from the right, and you can be from the left, and it leads to the same place. It's stripping the person of his individuality. Okay.
How do you describe how the right fascism is?
the person becomes subservient to the state. I guess the strongest example is
This is what they say.
it's a dream broken down by academics, I'm not sure. Classically it was like Nazi Germany. It wasn't that the person there was stripped of his individuality. On the contrary, to rise in the ranks, what you did is you showed, and they say that this is how they built what they called the final solution, was based on people showing special initiative. It wasn't as organized as we tend to think, but rather that the way they got people to do it was that was the way to rise in the ranks. The more Jews you killed, the more unwanted you killed, the more important you became. So it's not stripping you of your individuality. You're very individual. You have ranks. You go up the ranks. In the leftist type of fascism, everybody is completely equal. There's no real ranks at all. So it's a different type of stripping you of your individuality.
Because it has now undefined on the national level of Shikut and the soul.
Right. And both of them can become very adulterated.
But
But
some
now,
people say, if I have to listen to the Torah, I can't be an individual.
Exactly.
I'll do what I want.
I can't do what I want. Yeah. Okay, so now, how does this relate to us? So now I want to present a new idea that I don't think we've talked about exactly this way, but it connects to what Shoshana already said about David of Lelov, that he said that each of us will relearn our lives as Torah. It's from Reb David of Lelov. And he apparently he took it from the Baal Shem Tov, and it's really based on this type of teaching. So suddenly I realized that that's an important thing that Avram himself wrote. It actually stems from Avram. Good. Avram wrote a book. Some people say he wrote 2 books, but he wrote at least one of them. And wrote in the sense of writing back then is not exactly clear. It's not like he had a printing press, or even that maybe he had parchment that he wrote on. I'm not sure how he wrote. But eventually this book was written down as what we call the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah. And in Sefer Yetzirah he says something incredible. He says that God created the world with 3 books. And these 3 books, he doesn't say that they are gracious, Shmos Veikra. He says that these 3 books are Sefer, Sofer, Sefer, Sipur. So 3 books meaning 3 conjugations of the verb to write. First one is Sofer. Sofer means the writer, the author. The second is a Sefer. It's a book. The noun, the book. And the third one is Sipur, is the story. And there's a lot discussed about this in Chassidus and many things. But a very simple understanding is that Hashem created the world with these 3 books. It means that on the one hand he's the author, on the other hand he's the book itself, on the third hand, he has 3 hands, he's the story also. One of the most difficult things that we have in rectifying the ego is to let go, on the one hand, of our individuality, on the other hand, to understand that it's the most important thing. It's like, how do you do both? On the one hand, all those things that I may consider to be how I'm separate and different from everybody and from Hashem are negative. I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't feel separate. On the other hand, it is exactly those things that I came into the world to express. So how do you really grab both ends of this of this dilemma? Which are you? So in a certain sense, you can look at it as a process. How is it as a process? So as a sofer, you're the author. The author is not yet writing anything. He's just an author. He's a subjective person going through life. Okay? He's the sofer. The sofer, doesn't have a story in him. He's just the person who's eventually going to write it. He's doing it. He's like the actor. He's the subjective reality here. He's the subjective entity that is experiencing everything that's going on. What is he experiencing? What is this thing, this reality that he's experiencing? It's a book. It's a sefer. It's like what Hashem says, that he looked into the Torah, into the sefer, and he created reality. So there's a subject and an object. The subject is the person, the author, and the object is the life that he goes through. It's an objective reality that he's going through. What needs to be the outcome in the end? What connects these two things together? When it becomes a story. Now let's think about this in terms of a psychological process. What does it mean that you can tell your own story?
When you separate from yourself, what
Okay.
you just before from
Yeah.
yeah.
Meaning, you try to say,
That's not.
you're telling a story. So it's true that you are subjectively involved, but the moment that it becomes a story that you can tell, that you can put in writing, that you can speak to somebody else. That's why therapy is through speaking, through telling your story. Because by projecting it out of yourself, you create a healthy relationship with it. That on the one hand, it's true that I experienced all these hardships. It's true that I went through this. On the other hand, it's another story that Hashem is telling in the world. The moment that you can hear your own story as a story, you're healed. There's an incredible story from the Baal Shem Tov about this. They call it the story of stories. It's one of the best stories ever that was told, and was told after his death. That he had a servant. The servant, this man, the Baal Shem Tov, had a person who lived with them, I guess, in Mezhevich. And he served him. He was like a helper. Where did this man come from? This man was from another story that he went through. That he once went to Brod, and I think it was Brod, some other village, some other town, and there was a bishop there, like a high-ranking church official, who every so often will come out and rile the population to harm the Jews. That's what he used to do. And the Baal Shem Tov came there one specific time when he was there. Everybody was shut up in their houses. All the Jews, everybody was afraid to come out. And the Baal Shem Tov knocked on the door, and he came in and said, come in quickly, and they shut the door, And he says, why are you all here? So they tell him this bishop came now, and he's in the center of the town, and he's, spilling his poison, and it always ends terribly for us. So he says, okay, he called one of his students and said, go call this bishop. Tell him I want to talk to him. So apparently he had enough faith in the Baal Shem Tov that he went out, and a Jew walking through this riled crowd, they want to kill the Jews, and he made it to the bishop, and he says the Baal Shem Tov wants to see you. So he was shocked, and he said, stop. He wouldn't come. He sent him a second time, he wouldn't come. So finally, the Baal Shem Tov himself went out, and he told him, let's go talk. And so he came down with him off the pedestal, or wherever it was, and they talked for an hour. And the bishop didn't ascend back, and he disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. So years later, this man showed up. And it turned out it was this bishop, and he came to be with the Baal Shem Tov in his last days. And it was this bishop. It turned out that this bishop was actually a Jew who had professed Christianity, and like many of them that hate Jews, it's actually because they have an issue with themselves. So the Baal Shem Tov, he saved him from that, but he was responsible for so many casualties, so much pain. So he came to the Baal Shem Tov after many years, and he said, "What do I do how do I do tshuva in this?" So he says, "You're only takana now. The only way you can fix this now is that from after I pass away, I want you to go from Jewish community to Jewish community without anything, go in exile, and everywhere you go, wait to hear your own story. Wait until." So he eventually settled down. Years passed, 20 years passed, or whatever it was, and he hadn't heard the story. He went from place to place everywhere, and he said, in the end, I can't travel anymore. So he was wealthy for whatever reason, and he wasn't so wealthy. Whatever he had, he lived in Rome apparently, or somewhere in Italy, and he made it known that anybody who came to him and would tell him a Baal Shem Tov story, so he would give him a nice allowance.
Any Baal Shem Tov story?
Any Baal Shem Tov story. He couldn't say, "I want to hear my story." He said, "I just need to hear a Baal Shem Tov story." So he waited for many years. Eventually, somebody who was servant apparently was the same man who went to call the bishop twice, and he wouldn't come, but he didn't recognize him. He came to him, and this was a man who knew everything about the Baal Shem Tov. He'd been with him for years. And so he came to him for Shabbos, and he was very happy. He learned about this. He remembered him maybe even, or he knew it was somebody that was very connected to Baal Shem Tov. He probably has many stories to tell me, and one of them will be mine. And Erev Shabbos, he waited for him to say something, and this man suddenly he forgot, this guest, servant of the Baal Shem Tov, he forgot completely all the stories, couldn't remember a single one. And this went on, and just make it short. Finally, on Sunday, he kept him another day because he couldn't remember a single story. This man spent his whole life with the Baal Shem Tov, couldn't remember a single story. And then finally, at the very, very end, like he was ready to leave, he suddenly remembered that story about Brod and the bishop. So this is we call it the story of stories. But the point was that when you're able to hear your story as just a story, even that it's told by somebody else, and you can hear it, just the fact that you can tell it yourself in that way, then that's when the rectification has occurred. And it's when you can, that's what I think what David of Lulav meant, is that when you can turn it into Torah. To turn it into Torah, you have to accept that this is objective truth. It's not something, I don't go through the memory and groan or because it was me, but because of its intrinsic value, because of its objective value. In a certain sense, it's that your life becomes a story in your own eyes.
With the same.
On the one hand, it's still you. On the other hand, there's a certain detachment that allows you to hear it as not a story about you, but rather that this is a story that Hashem is telling. That's the main thing. It's not detachment in the sense it's just written in a book. He says it has to become Torah. It has become that this story of what you went through is the story in which Hashem revealed His story. So those three stages of Sofer, Sefer, and Sipur, being the author, which is you're entirely subjective, and what you go through, which is objective, going through objective reality or objective life as it is on paper, if you want. And then finally to be able to treat it like it's just a story, but it's not just a story. It's not a story that there's a million, there's a dime a dozen. Not like that. Oh, exactly. what the Plishtim try to do is they try to mock you. That's the klipa over your story. They mock it by saying there's nothing, there's no Torah here. This is not a revelation of Hashem. This is not a story that Hashem told. This is just, and again, it's not, it's all the trials and tribulations that you went through and everything that was difficult. And especially those things that he says here that were digging wells, that you worked on your innate nature to bring it to a divine origin, to bring it to a divine consciousness. The mockery of the Philistines is to tell you that really this is unimportant. It doesn't matter anymore. That's how they mock you. And then you lose faith in the fact that there is a story being told here. And the story, again, what's the mockery? That it's not Torah, that it's not connected to Hashem. In the end, what are you left with? You're left with the fact that my life is just my ego. It's just me going through things. And that's it. And when you're only like that, there's no water coming up. There's no upward direction in the well. The well is just earth. It's just falling down. It's just locked into your own self, into your own pain, into your own suffering. And it just becomes that this is all that there is. To be able to see that everything is part of the story that Hashem is telling through you, that's what gives you the power to turn your life into a divine life. But if you can't see it like that, then the Philistines have won. You have to do what Yitzchak did. Yitzchak is the power. That's why we say in the future that Yitzchak is our father. He'll be more our father than everybody else, because he gives us the strength. That needs to be discussed how, but he gives us the strength to undig these wells. Okay. So all this is.
I think you should, like, if they're giving the wells and there's some marketing people, I mean, is it like a balancing act that still you can like that's part of the story also?
So
If one up and the other one's down?
it depends on if it's in the past or in the present. About the past, it's not a balancing act. You have to completely undig the well. Undig the well.
So all the stories of our past.
Okay. All the stories of your past should be a well.
And does that mean the marketing people?
No, the mockery is then focused on the present all the time. What is the mockery? The mockery tells you it doesn't matter what you do. Meaning you're standing in front of a test, in front of a trial. Well, whatever a person has, to do this avera, not to do that avera. The mockery, the Philistines tell you, it doesn't matter what you do, you're a dime a dozen. There's a million like you, it doesn't matter at all what you do. There's no great story being told to you. So in the present, I don't know if to call it a balancing act. On the other hand, you have to come and say, you're right, in the sense that I'm not separate, meaning I'm not special. That it's this is where the carrying the opposites comes into play. Mm-hmm. About the past, you go through a process of being able to tell your story, or to hear your story as a story. About the present, on the one hand, you have to understand that this is very important because it's the story Hashem is telling. On the other hand, you can't come to a feeling, which is also what the Philistines lead to, which is that if I win against the Philistines, I'm the most important person in the world. By the way, who had that problem? So the person who had the biggest problem, that's why he's called the Mashiach of Tohu by Reb Tzadok. It's Shimshon HaGidol, Samson. His fight with the Philistines, on the one hand, he won. And every time he won, his feelings of superiority over them got the better of him. And he had to come down again, and he comes up and he comes down, and it's a very difficult life in that respect. But we have to know how to balance these. On the one hand, I have to win against the Philistines to say that it's not true that however I decide to act at this moment to do the right thing or not to do the right thing is unimportant because there's a million like me and nobody cares. On the other hand, I can't fall into feelings of superiority because of that. So there's a balancing act that you have to.
And if there's something about it having to be redone, the first time you did it isn't good enough.
Sometimes you have to redig
You
it.
always have to redig it. There's always somebody
There's
shoving
something
it back down
So I'm
on
saying
you.
the therapy is really redigging the well. And you're healed only when you can tell it as a story.
But it has to be redug. You can't tell your story after you dig it the first time. Can you? I mean, does it work usually ever if you just dig it first?
You can feel that the story is being told through you at this moment. But that requires the balancing act.
You're not answering the question.
You're not answering the question.
So
Like
I
you didn't answer
understand.
your question in the first place.
So say it
Why
again.
You have to redig a few times. Until
Yeah, sometimes
Sometimes
it's
you
not
don't
a story
have
yet.
Sometimes it is a story the first time you
Okay.
dig.
Okay. Sometimes it works the first time. But really, the person goes through a difficult childhood or difficult teenage years or whatever it is. At some point in their life, they can just tell it. And it doesn't
without
cause them...
emotions, without
So I'm not saying without emotions at all.
Yeah, but-
It's connected to you.
as an outside.
But in a certain sense, this is a story. The secret is that you would call secular psychology. The real secret is, so what do I learn from this? What does this tell me? What Torah is Hashem revealing through this?
Why did Hashem put me in that
Okay,
situation?
what is this? So this Torah is specific for me. I need to learn from this something.
Secular psychology does that too. So it must be a different.
I don't think they think that
type of
Hashem put
learning.
you in that position.
But that Hashem put you in that position, our learning.
That Hashem put me in that position, and it's for me to learn how to serve Hashem in the future also. And everything that I went through is to teach me what I have to
Secular is
work
to learn
on.
how to serve yourself.
Or how to feel good about yourself.
Right.
Do that also.
But
Okay,
when you
so
say
there's a
telling
final-
the story, is it with the sins? With the person's sins?
Unfortunately, yes. But then you can say them as like a story. They're part of the story. By the way, I still have to do vidui on them all the time. Forever. Because they're part of my story. Not somebody else's story. Nobody else has to do vidui for me. Nobody else has to do tshuva for me in the story. Okay, what time is it?
Nearly 1:15.
Okay, so the last point came up last night in the Rosh Shir. That for us, this is not necessarily a sign for the coming generations. Meaning our story is very important, but it's not necessarily true that if somebody else would come and read this, learn from it, that they would know where to dig. Okay? Each person in that sense has their own story today, because we're not patriarchs. We're not a beginning of a people. Okay? We are after Matan Torah. We're after the Torah was given. So our stories are more individualized. Whereas their stories, even though they were individual, they became the stories of the whole people, of the whole world. So why is that? So that's like a detrimental part of being a Jew. Because I'm already a descendant of the people who started it all. I can't really start something new, because I can't really be new. So Rav Nachman has this saying that I'm going to show you a path, which is a new path, and even though Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov traveled this path, it's a new path anyway, and he has this whole saying, that he's going to teach something new that was never done before, even though it was exactly done by Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's a little bit more of balancing opposites together. On the one hand it's new, on the other hand it's something old that was always done. But last night, the Rebbe said something very interesting. He said, what does a Jew have to learn from a non-Jew? He said that the process of conversion is like the process of being a patriarch. Like the test that a person goes through to decide whether they're going to convert or not, to leave their home, their birthplace. They're like going through what Avram went through. what Yitzchak went through. Why Yitzchak? Because Yitzchak also, he had a new path entirely. Wasn't chesed like his father, he was Gvura. Yaakov was already a combination of both. But both Avram and Yitzchak, they have a beginning, it's called. Atchala. The fact that they have Atchala means that they're a new thing in the world. There wasn't anything like this before. So he said every Jew has to learn, has to look at a non-Jew who converted and say, I have to serve Hashem the same way. That's what Rav Nachman meant. That even though it's the path that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are already traveled by, but I can also travel that path. How do I learn this? I learned this from somebody who converted.
Newborn.
And it's interesting, what are they called? They're called Yirei Hashem. Those who fear God. Very interesting. David calls them Yirei Hashem. No, the converts. The converts are called Yirei Hashem, so meaning that the Avos also were in the end Yirah, the fear of God. Yitzchak is fear. That gives another explanation of why Yitzchak becomes our main father, because everybody has to look at what does it look like when a person converts because he fears God. Not fears God in the sense of afraid of punishment, but fears God because of the Yirat HaRomemut, because of what Hashem's greatness, the awe from the greatness of Hashem. And because he converts because it's true, not because he fears the punishment. Okay. So every one of us can do that. So in that sense, every story can become like the Avos in a certain sense. It does have some meaning for the future. That's why Rav David Ablalov says that in the end this becomes a Torah that everybody learns, not just me. It begins to have objective value, not just subjective value. It's not just for me. Really, it can have objective value. How can this be? That's for a different discussion. But if you look at if you learn from the Avos, from the patriarchs, what they went through in order to come close to Hashem. We don't have an example of this. He says, no, we do have an example today. You can learn this from somebody. Who do you learn it from? From a convert. You have to look at what this person went through. That's why the best stories today, I was thinking, what was the takeaway message from last night? But the takeaway message for me that there has to be stories of conversion. There has to be books. There's many stories of tshuva. Said it, very nice. They're almost like conversion, but it's not the same. Why wasn't this done? In the past generations, it wasn't done because it was dangerous. It was dangerous for the converts, it was dangerous for their families, it was dangerous for the community that converted them, that allowed them to convert. Of course, didn't convert them, but allowed them to convert. But today, there's no danger. On the contrary, this is inspiring because it's like modern day patriarchs and matriarchs. It's like something that almost we don't, as a Jew who's born into it, you don't see. You don't understand it.
Well, unless involves shuvas, we do that.
So I said that stories of tshuva are very inspiring, but this is more.
But conversion's more.
I heard a man, and he was